"You're making a mistake," she said, and the entire diner went silent like someone had pulled the sound out of the room. The flashing red and blue lights painted the walls in sharp pulses, bouncing off chrome edges and half-empty coffee mugs, turning a quiet midnight shift into something tense, something heavier. Naomi Brooks stood frozen behind the counter, her fingers still wrapped around a glass she hadn't realized she stopped drying, her eyes locked on the man being held near the door. He didn't look like trouble, not the way people usually did when things went wrong. His suit was too clean, too precise, the kind of cut you didn't find in places like this, the kind that whispered money without trying. But it wasn't the suit that made her step forward. It was the way he stood there, calm, almost detached, like he knew something no one else in the room did. The officer closest to him tightened his grip, voice firm, controlled. "Sir, you need to come with us." No shouting, no chaos, just pressure in the air, thick and quiet. The kind that makes people look down at their plates and pretend nothing's happening. Naomi had seen that look before. People choosing silence because it was safer, because it cost less. Her heart thudded once, hard, then again, louder, like it was trying to make the decision for her. She glanced at the name tag clipped crooked on her apron, then at the clock above the register. 2 more hours on her shift. 2 more hours of staying invisible. That was the rule. Do your job. Don't get involved. Especially not with police. Especially not for a stranger. But something didn't sit right. It was small. Almost nothing. The way one officer avoided eye contact. The way the man didn't argue, didn't reach for his phone, didn't act like someone who needed saving. It didn't match. And Naomi noticed things. She always had. That was how you survived places where people rarely looked at you long enough to see who you really were. She took a step forward. Then another. The floor creaked under her shoes, louder than it should have been, like the room itself was warning her to stop. She didn't. "You're arresting the wrong man," she said, her voice steady even though her hands weren't. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter seemed to fade. One of the officers let out a short breath, almost amused. "Ma'am, please step back. This doesn't concern you." But Naomi didn't move. Not this time. Because something deeper than fear had already taken hold. And across the room, for the first time, the man lifted his eyes to meet hers. And in that single glance, something shifted, not in the room, not in the officers, but in the story that was about to unfold. The officer's smile faded just enough to show irritation, not doubt, not yet, but something close, something that meant the moment had shifted whether he liked it or not. And Naomi felt it in the air like a change in pressure before a storm, subtle but undeniable, as every pair of eyes in the diner moved between her and the man in the suit, waiting to see who would break first, and she did not. She could not after stepping this far, not after choosing to be seen. "What makes you think that?" the officer asked, his tone controlled, measured, the kind that tries to sound patient while already deciding you are wrong. And Naomi swallowed once, steadying her breath, because this was the part where most people backed down, where the weight of authority pushed them back into silence. But she had already crossed that line. "Because you did not ask him anything," she said, her voice clearer now, stronger. "You did not check his ID twice. You did not confirm the call. You just moved in. Like you already decided." A murmur rippled through the room, small, nervous, the sound of people realizing something might actually be off, and the second officer shifted slightly, just a step, but enough for Naomi to notice, enough to confirm what her instincts had already been telling her, that something here was not as certain as it looked. "Ma'am, we received a report," the first officer replied, sharper now. "That is enough." But Naomi shook her head, not dramatically, not boldly, just enough. "It should not be," she said, and now her hands were still, completely still. "Not if you are about to take someone away." Silence followed, heavier this time, pressing against the walls, filling every inch of the diner until even the hum of the neon sign outside felt too loud. And for a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Then the second officer cleared his throat, quiet, hesitant. "Maybe we should verify again," he said, almost to his partner, not to her, but it did not matter, because the shift had already happened. The first officer hesitated, just for a second, but that second was everything. It cracked the certainty, it let doubt in, and Naomi saw it, felt it, held on to it. as the man in the suit remained still, watching, not interfering, not helping, just letting it unfold. And then the radio on the officer's shoulder crackled to life. A voice on the other end asking for confirmation, details, something routine, something procedural, but suddenly it mattered more than anything. The officer responded, his tone tighter now, repeating the name, the description, the situation, and there was a pause, longer than it should have been, long enough for the entire room to lean into it without moving. And then the reply came back, calm, almost casual. Negative, that is not the individual. Repeat, not the individual. The words landed softly, but the impact was immediate, visible, undeniable. The officer's grip loosened, the tension broke, and for the first time since they had entered, uncertainty fully replaced control. The cuffs were removed without a word, without an apology, just a quiet correction that felt too small for what almost happened. And Naomi exhaled slowly, not in relief, not exactly, but in recognition of what she had just done, what she had risked. And across from her, the man adjusted his sleeve, smooth, composed, as if nothing had shaken him at all. But when he looked at her again, it was different this time. Not curiosity, not surprise, something deeper, something that lingered. You noticed, he said quietly, and Naomi nodded once. Someone had to, she replied, and for a brief second, the room felt balanced again, like the story had settled, like everything was returning to normal. But it was not really, because some moments do. Not end when they are over. They wait, they carry forward, they change what comes next, and neither of them knew yet just how much this one would. The door closed behind the officers with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have, like the end of something no one had expected to begin, and for a few seconds no one moved, no one spoke, as if the entire diner needed time to catch up with what had just happened. Then slowly, conversations returned in low murmurs, forks lifted again, coffee cups touched lips, but the air was different now, thinner, sharper, like something invisible had been pulled away, and Naomi felt it most of all as she turned back toward the counter, her legs steady but her thoughts still catching up, replaying every second, every word, every risk she had taken in a place where people like her were not supposed to take risks, not like that, not in front of authority, not for someone she did not even know, and yet she had, and now there was no way to take it back. You should be careful. Her manager's voice came low from behind her, not angry, not loud, but tight, controlled, the kind of voice that carries warning without needing to raise itself. Naomi nodded once, not arguing, not apologizing either, just acknowledging the truth in it, because she knew the rules, she had lived by them long enough. Keep your head down. Do your job. Do not get involved, especially not when uniforms and flashing lights are in the room. But rules had a way of bending when something deeper stepped in, something quieter but stronger, and tonight, that something had been louder than fear. She picked up the glass again, the same one she had been holding before everything changed, and finished drying it, slow, deliberate, as if returning to routine could settle the shift inside her. But it did. Not completely, because she could still feel it, that moment when the room turned, when doubt entered where certainty used to stand, when her voice had carried more weight than it was ever supposed to. And across the diner, the man had not left. He had taken a seat near the window, the neon sign outside casting a soft glow across his face, calmer now, almost thoughtful, as if he were studying something invisible, something only he could see. Naomi noticed him without meaning to, the way she noticed everything, small details, quiet changes, the kind that most people missed because they were too busy or too distracted or too certain of what they believed they were seeing. He did not look like someone who had just avoided a mistake that could have changed his entire night. Maybe more than that. He looked like someone who expected things to resolve, not out of luck, not out of chance, but because that was how his world worked, and that thought lingered longer than she expected, because it did not fit. Not with this place, not with this hour, not with the man she had seen standing in silence just minutes ago. She walked over with a coffee pot. Routine again, safe again. Refill, she asked, her voice neutral, professional, the way it always was. He looked up, met her eyes, and for a second the noise of the diner faded again, not because of tension this time, but because of something quieter, something harder to define, recognition, maybe, or respect. something unspoken but clear. "Please," he said. Simple, measured, and as she poured the dark liquid steady into the cup, he added, "You saw what others ignored." Naomi gave a small shrug, almost dismissive. "I just paid attention," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew it was more than that. Attention was not what made people speak. Courage was, and courage was not something this place asked for. Not from her, not from anyone like her. He nodded slightly, as if confirming something for himself, then glanced around the diner, taking it in, the worn booths, the flickering light above the counter, the quiet people returning to their routines, and when his eyes came back to her, there was a shift again, subtle but real. "Do you always do that?" he asked. Naomi frowned slightly, not understanding. "Do what?" she replied, and he held her gaze for a moment before answering. "Step in when it is easier to stay silent." The question hung there, heavier than it sounded, because it was not really a question, not fully. It was something else, something closer to evaluation, and Naomi hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, before saying, "No." Then after a beat, softer, "Only when it matters." He leaned back slightly, considering that, and for the first time, something close to a smile touched his expression, not wide, not obvious, but enough to change the way his face held the light. "Then tonight mattered," he said, and Naomi nodded once, because it had, whether she could explain it or not, and as she turned to leave, to return to the counter, to the rhythm she knew, the one that kept life predictable, manageable, she did not see the way he reached into his jacket, not for a wallet, not for a phone, but for something else entirely, something small, something deliberate, something that would not matter tonight, but would change everything by morning. The bell above the door chimed softly as he stood up to leave, a small sound that somehow carried more weight than the sirens had minutes ago, and Naomi glanced up just in time to see him pause, not at the exit, but beside the counter, his hand resting lightly against the worn edge as if memorizing the place, the kind of gesture that did not belong to someone passing through. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice low, steady. And Naomi hesitated for a fraction of a second, not because she did not know the answer, but because something about the way he asked made it feel like it mattered more than it should. "Naomi," she said, and he nodded once, as if filing it away somewhere precise, somewhere intentional. "Thank you, Naomi," he added, not rushed, not casual, but deliberate, and then he stepped out into the night, disappearing into the reflection of street lights and distant traffic like someone who had never been out of place to begin with, the door closing behind him with that same quiet click, and just like that, it was over, or at least it should have been, because nights like this were supposed to reset, to fade into routine, to become nothing more than a story you might tell once and then forget. But this one did not settle that easily. Not for Naomi, not for the way it lingered in her chest as she wiped down the counter, as she stacked plates, as she moved through the rest of her shift with the same efficiency she always had, except now every small sound felt sharper. Every glance carried more meaning. Every second seemed to stretch just a little longer than before. And when her shift finally ended, when the clock ticked past 2 in the morning and the diner emptied into silence, she stepped outside into the cool air, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders as the city settled into its quieter rhythm. The kind that belongs to delivery trucks and distant sirens and the occasional passing car. And for a moment she stood there, still, letting the night breathe around her, replaying it again. The look in his eyes, the way he had not been surprised, not really, the way he had said her name like it was something worth remembering. And then she shook it off, because that was not her world, not really. Whatever he was, whoever he was, it did not change hers, not in any way that mattered. And with that thought she turned and walked home. The familiar route, the same cracked sidewalks, the same dim streetlights, the same quiet determination that had carried her through every long shift before this one. And by the time she reached her small apartment, the moment had already begun to feel distant, like something that had happened to someone else, someone braver, someone with more to gain. She set her keys down, kicked off her shoes, and let the silence of the room settle around her. Simple, steady, hers, and for a few hours. That was enough, but morning does not ask what you are ready for. It arrives the same way every time. Light pushing through thin curtains, traffic building outside, The world moving forward whether you are prepared or not. And when Naomi stepped back into the diner later that day, the smell of coffee and grilled bread filling the air, it felt normal again. Almost too normal, like the night before had been a glitch that had already corrected itself. Until she noticed the cars, sleek, black, lined along the curb where there were never cars like that. Engines quiet, doors unopened, waiting, and then the suits, men standing just outside the entrance, not talking, not moving much, just watching. The kind of stillness that did not belong to customers or passers-by. And something inside her shifted again, not fear, not yet, but recognition. The same instinct that had pushed her to speak the night before, telling her that whatever had ended when that door closed had not ended at all. It had only paused, and now, it was about to begin again, only. This time, it would not be quiet. The door did not open right away, and somehow that made it worse. The way those men in dark suits stood perfectly still outside the glass, not checking their phones, not speaking, just waiting with a kind of patience that did not belong to ordinary people. And inside the diner, the usual rhythm faltered, plates paused midair, conversations dropped into whispers. Even the manager slowed his steps as he followed Naomi's gaze toward the entrance, confusion tightening his expression, because nothing about this looked normal, nothing about this felt accidental. And Naomi felt it again, that same quiet pressure from the night before, the sense that something unseen was about to shift the entire room. Then finally, the door opened, not pushed hard, not rushed, just a smooth, deliberate motion, and he walked in. The same man, the same face, but everything else was different. The suit sharper, darker, the kind that fit like it had been measured to the millimeter, the shoes polished to a mirror shine, and behind him, the men followed, not crowding him, not leading him, just aligning with him, like gravity had rearranged itself around his presence. And suddenly the diner felt smaller, tighter, like it had been folded inward without anyone noticing. Naomi did not move at first, her hands resting on the edge of the counter, her eyes fixed on him as he stepped forward, calm, composed, not looking around for approval, not searching for anything, as if he already knew exactly where he was and exactly why he had returned. The manager straightened quickly, forcing a polite smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Sir, welcome," he began, but his voice lost strength halfway through, because the man did not stop for him, did not acknowledge him. Instead, he walked directly toward Naomi, every step quiet but undeniable, and when he reached the counter, he placed something down in front of her, a card, simple, dark, heavier than it looked, and for a second, Naomi did not touch it. She just stared, because something about it felt different, not like a business card, not like anything she had seen passed across this counter before. "Good morning, Naomi," he said, his voice the same as the night before. Steady, controlled. But now it carried something else, something that filled the space without needing to rise, and Naomi blinked once, grounding herself. "Morning," she replied, her tone careful, neutral, but inside, her thoughts were moving faster than she could follow, because nothing about this was casual, nothing about this was coincidence. He nodded slightly toward the card. "You should take a look," he said, and slowly, almost cautiously, Naomi reached out and picked it up, the surface smooth under her fingers, the weight solid, real, and when she turned it over, the name caught the light first, bold, precise, impossible to ignore, Ethan Caldwell, and beneath it, a title that did not belong in this place, not in this diner, not in her world, Chief Executive Officer, Caldwell Holdings, and for a second, everything went quiet again, not in the room, not outside, but inside her, like her thoughts had paused just long enough to understand what she was looking at, what she had stepped into the night before without knowing. And when she looked back up at him, really looked this time, the pieces aligned, the calm, the certainty, the way he had stood in silence like the outcome had never been in doubt, and behind him, the men in suits were not decoration, not security for show, they were confirmation, proof of something much larger than this room could hold. The manager's expression shifted. Recognition dawning too late. Respect rushing in where confusion had been seconds ago. But Ethan did not look at him, did not look at anyone else. His attention remained on Naomi, steady, intentional. "Last night," he said quietly, "you stepped in when no one else would." Naomi held his gaze, her grip tightening slightly on the card. "It was the right thing to do," she answered, and for the first time, he allowed a faint smile to surface, not impressed, not surprised, just certain. "That is exactly why I came back," he said, and in that moment, Naomi realized this was not a thank you, not a simple gesture. This was something else entirely, something that had already begun to change the ground beneath her feet, whether she was ready for it or not. Naomi did not speak right away, and that silence stretched between them, not awkward, not uncertain, but heavy with something new, something neither of them rushed to break, because once words were said, things would change, and deep down, she already felt that change beginning. Like the ground beneath her was no longer as steady as it had been just minutes ago, her fingers still resting on the card, the name staring back at her like proof that last night had not been a coincidence, not luck, not something small, but something that had connected her to a world she had never stepped into before, and Ethan watched her carefully, not impatient, not demanding, just observant, the same way she had been the night before, as if he understood that this moment was not about what he could say, but about what she was realizing. "You own all of this?" she asked finally, her voice quieter now, not weak, just recalibrating, trying to match the weight of what she was beginning to understand. Ethan glanced around the diner, slow, deliberate, taking in the worn booths, the faded menu board, the chipped counter edges, and then he looked back at her. "This location is part of a portfolio," he said, simple, understated, but the words carried more than they revealed, because this was not just one place, not just one investment. This was scale, reach, influence, the kind that reshaped things without asking permission, and Naomi exhaled slowly, processing, because last night she had stood between him and something serious, something official, without knowing who he was, without knowing what he controlled, and now that knowledge sat in front of her like a mirror reflecting a different version of the same moment. One where the risk was bigger, the consequences heavier, and yet, she had still done it, and that realization settled into her chest with a quiet kind of strength. "You could have handled it yourself," she said, not accusing, not questioning, just stating what now seemed obvious, and Ethan tilted his head slightly. Considering her, "Yes," he answered, "but that is not the point," and there it was again, that shift, that difference between power used and power chosen. Naomi narrowed her eyes slightly, not defensive, just focused. "Then what is?" she asked, and for the first time, he leaned in just a fraction, closing the distance between them without breaking the calm that defined him. "Most people in that room last night saw authority and stepped back," he said, his voice low enough that it did not carry beyond the counter. "You saw something was wrong and stepped forward." He paused, just long enough for the words to settle. "That is not common." Naomi felt the weight of that statement more than she expected, because it was not praise, not in the way people usually offered it. It was recognition, precise and measured, like he was identifying something she had always had but no one had ever named. And behind him, the manager shifted again, this time more visibly, his posture straighter, his tone softer as he hovered just outside the conversation, clearly aware that the dynamic in his own diner had changed in a way he could not control. Naomi noticed it. Of course she did. She noticed everything. And for a moment, she thought about what that meant. How quickly respect could appear when power was visible. How differently people moved when they understood who was standing in front of them. And it did not sit comfortably, not completely, because last night, none of that had mattered. Last night, she had acted without knowing, without calculating, without weighing status or consequence, and that difference mattered more to her than anything written on that card. "I did not do it for you," she said, her voice steady again, grounded, and Ethan's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened slightly, not offended, not surprised, just attentive. "I know," he replied, and that simple acknowledgement carried more respect than any compliment could have, because it meant he understood the line she was drawing, the boundaries she was protecting, the fact that what she had done belonged to her, not to him, not to his world, not to his power. And for a brief second, the balance between them felt equal again, not because their lives were the same, but because in that moment, they were standing on the same ground, defined not by status, but by choice. And Ethan straightened slightly, his gaze steady. "That is exactly why this matters," he said. And Naomi felt it again. That quiet shift, the sense that whatever came next was not going to be small, not going to be simple, and definitely not something she could walk away from as easily as she had thought when the night ended. Naomi held his gaze, steady but guarded, because something in the way he spoke made it clear that whatever came next was not going to be a simple thank you, not a handshake, not a tip left on the counter and forgotten by the next shift. It was something heavier, something intentional, and she had learned long ago that intentions from people with power rarely came without consequences. "What do you mean by that?" she asked. Her voice calm, but sharper now, and Ethan did not answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket again, and this time what he placed on the counter was not small, not subtle. It was a folder, clean, structured, the kind used for decisions, not conversations, and the moment it touched the surface, the energy in the diner shifted again, because even the people pretending not to watch could feel it. The difference between a visit and an offer. Naomi looked down at it, then back at him, not touching it yet, not accepting anything without understanding it first. "Open it," he said, not as a command, but as a simple step, like the outcome was already in motion, and slowly, carefully, she did. The paper inside crisp, organized, filled with numbers, terms, language that belonged to contracts and ownership, and her eyes moved across the page once, then again, slower this time, until the meaning settled in, until the words stopped being abstract and became real. And when she looked up, there was something new in her expression, not shock, not disbelief, but focus, intense and deliberate. "You want me to run this place?" she asked, and behind her, the manager stiffened, the question landing harder on him than anything that had happened so far, because now this was no longer about last night, no longer about a mistake corrected. This was about change, real change, the kind that did not ask permission from the people it replaced. Ethan nodded once. "Not just run it," he said. "I want you to own a part of it." The words settled into the room like something heavy placed carefully, and for a second, Naomi did not react, not outwardly, but inside. Everything moved, every assumption, every boundary she had drawn around her life, every quiet rule she had followed to keep things stable, predictable, manageable, all of it shifted under the weight of what he was offering, because this was not a reward, not in the simple sense. This was a redefinition, a different path being placed directly in front of her without warning, and she felt it, the pull of it, the possibility, the risk, the way it could change everything if she stepped into it, and also the way it could take something from her if she did, something she could not easily name but instinctively protected. "Why me?" she asked, not out of doubt, but out of precision, because she needed to hear it, needed to understand exactly what he saw, and Ethan did not hesitate this time. "Because you do not wait for permission to do what is right," he said, his voice even, grounded. "And that is the kind of judgment I trust more than experience, more than titles, more than anything written on a resume." Naomi felt those words settle deeper than the offer itself, because they spoke to something she had never put into language, something she had always done, without thinking, without recognition, without expecting it to matter beyond the moment. And now here it was, being named, being valued, being turned into something larger than a single decision on a single night. And she looked down at the folder again, then around the diner, the place she had walked into every day without expecting anything to change, the place that had never asked her for more than her time and her silence. And now suddenly, it was asking for something else entirely, something bigger, and she could feel every eye in the room without turning her head, feel the weight of expectation, curiosity, even quiet resistance. And for the first time since this began, Naomi hesitated, not because she was afraid, but because she understood exactly how much this decision would matter, not just for her, but for everything that came after. And Ethan watched her, not rushing, not persuading, just waiting, because this part, he knew, did not belong to him. It never had. It was hers, entirely, and whatever she chose next would define not just the outcome of this moment, but the kind of power she was willing to step into. Naomi did not reach for the pen, not yet, and that pause said more than any immediate answer could, because it showed she understood exactly what was being placed in front of her, not just opportunity, not just money, but a shift in identity, a step from being unseen to being responsible for what others would now see. And she let that weight settle, not rushing to escape it, not rushing to accept it either. Her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the folder as her eyes moved across the diner. Once more, slower this time, noticing things she had never needed to notice before. The way the morning light hit the booths, the uneven rhythm of service, the small inefficiencies she had worked around without thinking, and now, suddenly, they felt different, like problems waiting to be solved instead of inconveniences to endure, and that realization changed something inside her, subtle but real. "If I take this," she said, her voice steady but quieter, more deliberate, "it is not going to be the same place." And Ethan did not hesitate. "It should not be," he replied, simple, certain, as if that was the entire point. Naomi nodded slightly, absorbing that, because change was easy to say, but hard to live, especially in a place where people had grown comfortable with things staying exactly as they were, and she could already feel it, the tension behind her, the quiet resistance from those who had watched her carry trays and keep her head down, who were now watching her stand at the center of something they did not control, and she understood that too, because power did not just lift one person, it shifted everyone around them, and not everyone welcomed that shift. She looked down at the contract again, then closed the folder gently, not rejecting it, not accepting it yet, just holding it, claiming the moment as hers instead of letting it rush past her. "If I do this," she continued, her eyes meeting his again, clear, focused, "I do it my way," and there was no challenge in her tone, no defiance for the sake of it, just clarity, the kind that comes from knowing exactly where you stand. And Ethan's expression did not change, but something in his posture aligned with hers, not above it, not over it, but with it. "That is the only way it works," he said, and for a second, the noise of the diner faded again, not because something dramatic had happened, but because something important had been agreed without needing to be forced, without negotiation, without compromise, just recognition, and Naomi felt it. That balance returning, not equal in power, not equal in resources, but equal in understanding, and that mattered more than anything written on the pages between them. She took a slow breath, then reached for the pen, not quickly, not dramatically, just with intention, and as her fingers wrapped around it, she paused one last time, not out of doubt, but out of respect for the moment, because this was not just a decision, this was a line she was about to cross, one that could not be uncrossed, one that would change how she moved, how she was seen, how she saw herself. And when she finally signed, her name written clean, steady, unmistakably hers, something shifted again, not in the room, not immediately, but in the direction of her life, subtle, quiet, but permanent. And Ethan watched without interruption, without approval or celebration, just acknowledgement, as if he understood that the real change had nothing to do with him. It never had. It was about the choice she had just made, the same kind of choice she had made the night before. Only now, the scale was different, the consequences larger, and when she set the pen down, she did not look around for reaction, did not wait for validation. She simply met his eyes again, grounded, steady. "Then let us begin," she said, and for the first time since he walked in, Ethan allowed a real smile to surface, not because he had gained something, but because he had recognized it when it mattered, and now, so had she. The change did not happen all at once, not in a single dramatic moment, but in a series of quiet shifts that unfolded over the next few hours, the kind you only notice if you are paying attention. And Naomi was always paying attention. She stood behind the same counter, in the same uniform, but nothing about the way she stood was the same, her shoulders slightly back, her movements more deliberate, not slower, not rushed, just intentional, as if every step now carried weight beyond the task itself. And around her, people felt it, even if they could not explain it. The servers who used to move past her without a second glance now hesitated just long enough to acknowledge her presence. The manager who once spoke in quiet warnings now spoke in careful tones, choosing words with more thought than before, and Naomi noticed all of it, not with satisfaction, not with pride, but with clarity, because this was what power looked like when people recognized it. It did not shout, it shifted behavior. It rewrote the way a room moved without needing to announce itself. And yet, for her, the most important change was not in them. It was in how she saw everything she had once accepted. Without question, the slow service, The outdated systems, the way customers were treated depending on how they looked or what they wore, things she had worked around before, things she had ignored because they were not hers to fix, but now they were, and that realization settled in quietly, not overwhelming, not intimidating, just present, real, and she stepped into it the same way she had stepped forward the night before, without hesitation, without asking if she was allowed, because she understood now that permission had never been the point. She walked toward the manager, the folder still resting lightly in her hand. "We need to adjust the floor layout," she said, her voice calm but certain, and he blinked once, surprised, then nodded quickly, not out of obligation, but because something in her tone made it clear this was not a suggestion, it was direction, and one by one, small changes began, subtle at first. Tables repositioned, workflow streamlined, conversations shifting, from habit to intention, and through it all, Ethan remained where he was, not interfering, not directing, just observing from a distance, his presence steady but unobtrusive, because he knew this part was not his. It never had been. He had not come to take control. He had come to recognize it when it appeared. And now, he was watching it unfold, exactly as he expected, exactly as it should. And as the hours passed, the diner began to feel different, not transformed, not yet, but aligned, like it was moving towards something it had always been capable of becoming but never had the reason to, until now. And Naomi felt it with every step, every decision, every quiet moment where she chose to act instead of wait. And when she finally paused, just for a second, her eyes drifting toward the window where the light had shifted from morning to afternoon, she caught her reflection faintly in the glass, the same face, the same person, but something in her gaze had changed, something steadier, something more certain, and in that reflection, she saw not what she had been given, but what she had chosen, the same choice she made when she stepped forward in a room full of silence, the same choice she made when she signed her name without hesitation. And across the room, Ethan met her eyes one last time before turning toward the door. No grand exit, no final speech, just a quiet departure, because the story no longer needed him at the center of it. It never had. And as the door closed behind him, the sound soft and final, Naomi did not follow, did not watch him leave. She turned back to the diner, to the movement, to the work, to the future she had just stepped into. And in that moment, the balance of power was no longer something that had been given, or revealed, or proven. It was something she carried, something she had always carried, long before anyone had the power to notice it. And that was the part no one could ever take away.